Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is One Piece East Blue Saga Arlong Park Arc, episode 39, Luffy Drowning, Zoro vs. Octopus Hatchin. Episode in a nutshell is a brief reminder of what happened in the episode. So, in this episode, we basically pick up where the last one left off. Luffy's been thrown into the water. Zoro is facing off against Hachi or Hatchin. Karubi is versus Sanji, and Usopp is running away from Chu. And Nami is still at her house. And the villagers, of course, have gathered to watch the spectacle. And the majority of this episode does focus on Zoro dealing with the fallout of his wounds, because they were so severe and he's been pushing himself to work through them. He's developed a fever. He faints briefly. We see him wobbling. We see looking like, he's about to pass out as he's fighting against Hachi. Hachi, of course, starts with more of a comedic fighting style where he's just kind of fooling around. He spits some ink at Zoro. Then he sticks himself up on a column asking why Zoro is using only one sword when he's known for the three swords style, but saying that, it's not his true form yet. He runs inside real quick, comes back out with six swords, that's his true form, and starts to brag about how no human can beat him because they only have two arms. He has six. Zoro then gets Johnny and Yusaku's swords to be able to use his three sword style. A bit disappointingly, Hachi does take advantage a little bit and does target Zoro's wounds briefly in the fight, but ultimately Zoro ends up defeating Hachi, and this also leads to then Kurubi kind of shifting his interest towards Zoro, who's about to fall down. Sanji was, while distracted by Zoro's fainting earlier, he was punched through a wall and he was outside and he rested there for a bit before coming in and once again challenging Kurubi. However, they do realize they have to get Luffy, who is at the bottom of the ocean, and Zoro's in no condition to do that. So Sanji then jumps into the ocean and Kurubi jumps in after him, which puts Kurubi at a very big advantage in their fight. And as Sanji is heading down towards where Luffy is, he does see Genzo performing a CPR, the like compressions, chest compressions for CPR. And that, of course, he notices just before he ends up getting hit by Kurubi, who is moving through the water very easily. Usopp, as mentioned, is still running away from Chu. And we see a brief glimpse of him like a checkup. And then the other main part of this episode was Nojiko and Genzo deciding to try to save Luffy. At first, they bring down a hammer to try to break the stone under the water. However, they aren't able to get enough force to break the stone, but luckily they do recall that Luffy is rubber, and so they stretch his head up above the water and start chest compressions to try to get the water out of his lungs in order to revive him, at least long enough for them to decide what to do about the stone in the water. And that's pretty much everything that occurred in this episode. Out of order, but all summarized. So now that we've been reminded about what happened, we will now rank the episode. As always, we'll be ranking on our mostly objective ranking, followed by the personal ranking. So on our mostly objective ranking, we actually have quite a few things that applied to this episode. So we will start with 2 points for our resolved battle. Hachi and Zoro do complete their battle, start to finish, within this episode. Or I guess technically you could say it started last episode when they were all choosing their opponents, finished this episode. Either way, the battle between Hachi and Zoro is resolved with Zoro's victory, and that is worth 2 points. Then we have our single arc main character growth, and this is Karubi, and he reveals that he's a 40th Dan in Fishman Karate. And then he uses against Sanji in the water the Fishman Karate forearm sledge, which attacks the back of Sanji's neck, and that's worth 2 points. We then also have our multi-arc supporting character growth, which is Hachi, and Hachi does use some attacks that we've seen previously, but the new attacks in this episode, which is his growth, are Hachi's triple sword catch. He does fail in the catch, but it is a named attack. Then we have Hachi suckers, which he uses to attach himself to the column. This is again another comedic moment in the show. Then, of course, he reveals that the style that he uses is the six sword style. And then some attacks that he has is six sword style, tentacle sword overload, not lord. Then we have six sword style, octopus pot stance, New Year's open body slam, six sword ultimate technique, waltz of six swords, which is his last attack before being defeated. But we get to see a lot of how he fights, and of course, because this is the full duration of their fights, this is pretty much all of Hachi's moves so far. Then we get our multi-arc main character growth, worth 4 points, and that, of course, has to do with Zoro, who also reveals 2 new attacks throughout fighting Hachi. The first one is the three-sword style, Streaming Wolf Swords. And then the second is his final finishing move, the Dragon Twister. And that brings us to the end of our positive points, which brought us all the way up to 11 points. However, I did feel that there were some negatives. The first negative is the regression of Zoro's character. And this is due to the fever of his wounds. Obviously, there are plot reasons why a character who is overwhelmingly strong needs to be weakened to be in line with the current level of the enemies, and I think that's what they tried to do with Zoro. So they had him wounded, not fully healed. Now he has a fever, so he's fighting with a huge handicap. He still manages to win. Had he been, therefore, at full power, we can assume that the fight would have lasted like 2 seconds, and the enemies would have been decimated. We wouldn't have needed Luffy, we wouldn't have needed Sanji, and we wouldn't have needed Usopp. So, ultimately, the regression of his character, or the weakening of his character, I should say, was necessary to the plot, but it is still worth -1 point, which is Zoro's incapacitation due to his wounds and the fever that they brought on. -1. Then we also had -2, which is the negative messaging or behavior. And as always with villain characters, there's a certain level of expectation of bad behavior, but that doesn't mean that you don't need to call it out or that it isn't worth a negative points, depending on how severe it is. In this case, Hachi brags about, how much stronger he is. He brags about his six-sword style, how human can never defeat him, and yet, disappointingly, because Hachi is very much a fun character, he does decide to go for Zoro's wounds. There is a point where he uses the New Year's open body slam, and he basically pushes Zoro's swords away from his core and then headbutts Zoro right in his wounds, right in the chest. And it's like, the dude's already weakened, he's got a fever from these wounds, you know the wounds are there, and you're purposefully targeting them. Good move in a fight, bad behavior from like a moral ethical standpoint. So again, -2 points, which brings this overall episode to an 8 out of 10 on our mostly objective rank values. And that now brings the arc ranking so far to, in first, the most wicked man of East Blue, Fishman Pirate Arlong, Luffy stands up, end of a broken promise, Usopp's death, Luffy yet to land, Luffy drowning, Zoro versus Octopus Hatchan is this episode, it falls in 4th place. Then the Witch of Kokoyashi Village, Arlong's female officer, Survive, the Mother Bell Mare and Nami's family, Luffy in Trouble, Fishmen versus Luffy Pirates. Reunited, Usopp tells Nami's true story. And then in last place so far, we have the hidden past, female fighter Belmare. My personal ranking for the episode is quite high. I like the fighting episodes. I like that they intermixed comedy in with the fight. The only downside is that they did make the fight pretty drawn out. Like there was a lot of pausing to really highlight Zoro's fever, but I feel like that pausing was for plot purposes and to build up the tension. Hachi, of course, very funny character, and he does kind of start the fight with a few gags, but then once the fight becomes serious, we still get a little bit of a comedic break with um, Usopp and Chu. For example, Chu is chasing Usopp. Usopp then glances behind him, doesn't see Chu, assumes Chu is so far behind him and a turtle on land that he then starts basically smack talking and dancing around in the middle of the road while he's smack talking, only to have Chu come up behind him and then, he screeches and continues to run away again. But you get those little moments interspersed. Nami, we get a quick checkup on that she's now feeling ready. She's cried as much as she wanted to, whined a lot, and now she's resolved. And so she picks up her staff to go and head towards where the rest of the villagers are with Luffy's hat. And then, of course, there was also some comedic value in the realization that Luffy was rubber when they're under the water. Genzo and Nojiko, they're like having some sort of telepathic conversation, and then all of a sudden are like, oh, right, he's rubber. We can bring his head up out of the water. And, they gasp and all the bubbles come up. And that's fun. Sanji jumping into the water is a little bit dumb, but at the same time, he doesn't know about Genzo and Nojiko, so it's understandable. He and Zoro still feel they're on the time crunch and really need to save Luffy in a timely manner. And so he does jump into the water, but that is a stupid move because obviously Karubi is taking advantage of that, and now he is at a massive disadvantage in the water. But again, I feel like that's similar to Zoro's fever, is Sanji is a very strong character, stronger perhaps than the level of the enemies in this arc, and so in order to build the tension and create the interest and drag out the fights, they need to weaken or give them a handicap, and so Zoro's handicap was his fever, and Sanji's is that he is at a disadvantage in the water. Usopp doesn't need a handicap, so he's just running around terrified, which again is a very nice comedic break to break up the more serious tone of the actual fight between Zoro and Hachi. And then again, the fight between Zoro and Hachi was entertaining. We got a lot of new attack moves. Overall, really liked this episode, really enjoyed it, didn't really see anything overly negative about it, so I gave it a 9 out of 10. It's a 9 out of 10 because I was very disappointed in Hachi's behavior in targeting Zoro's wounds because I feel like he's better than that. And that brings us to our arc rankings so far. In first, we have Luffy Stands Up, End of a Broken Promise. This episode I put second, Luffy Drowning, Zoro versus Octopus Hatchan. Luffy in Trouble, Fishmen versus Luffy Pirates. The Most Wicked Man of East Blue, Fishman Pirate Arlong. Usopp's Death, Luffy Yet to Land. Reunited, Usopp tells Nami's true story. Survive, the Mother Bell Mare and Nami's family. The Witch of Kokoyashi Village, Arlong's female officer. And then in ninth place for myself as well, we have the Hidden Past, female fighter Belmare. Bringing us to the saga ranking so far, which is where we are ranking each of the arcs within the East Blue Saga against each other. And on our mostly objective ranking so far, we have Romance Dawn in first place with 86.67, Orangetown second, 76%, Baratie Arc 68.33%, Syrup Village is at 64%, and Arlong Park Arc so far has 66 out of 150. On the personal ranking, I feel like it's pretty similar. with the exception, of course, of Orangetown arc being in first place at 74%. Romance Dawn arc then is second at 66.67%. Baretti arc at 52.5%, Serret Village arc at 49%, and then Arlong Park arc so far is pretty strong at 68 out of a possible 150. Bringing us now to the final segment, which is the series ranking so far. We will be ranking each of the sagas against each other. Under this ranking, ouch. I hit my finger, that hurt. Okay, where was I? Series rankings so far. We'll be ranking each of the sagas against each other. So far on the list, Mostly Objective has 25 out of 80 for the East Blue Saga. Personal ranking has 14 out of 80 for the East Blue Saga. So with that, we've now rewatched and ranked One Piece East Blue Saga Arlong Park Arc Episode 39, Luffy Drowning, Zoro vs. Octopus Hatchan. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.